Hello, and welcome to the podcast where friends discuss environmental policies from around the planet. Hello, guys. Welcome back to the Planet Policy Pals podcast. As you can tell, I'm very excited, and I'm Ala. I'm here with my fellow policy pal, Ajwa. What's up, girl?
Hey, not much. What's up with you?
I'm just in a great mood. I'm so happy to be back here recording. You guys, I know we were supposed to come back like 3 weeks ago or something like that, but life happens, you know what I mean? Finals, weddings, people traveling, and we do have like a really nice, sleek website now. If you guys want to check out the website, it looks really good. And we have new pictures.
It really does. I didn't like the old one either, you guys. But check out this one. This one is nice.
Okay, she approved the last one, you guys. It wasn't like picked without her.
It was like picking your politicians. It's not your choice, but it's what you have.
Okay. Anyway, we do have pictures of us on there, new pictures, so you can see us. It's nice. So what's going on with you, girl?
Not much. It is around Christmas time, and I got to set up a tree. So, yeah, I know you hate this time of the year.
Yep.
But the rest of the normal people actually like it. There's lights everywhere. Everybody's nice and jolly. And even though I'm in upstate New York, it is 60 degrees. I'm pretty sure there's trees that are regrowing outside right now. And then they say climate change isn't real. Talk to me about it.
60 degrees? Ew. Yeah, it's still too cold for me, personally, but enjoy.
Okay, Miss Texas. Take a seat.
Down south, you know how we do. Okay, so anyway, speaking of Christmas time, a lot of us are traveling, and something that we noticed a couple months ago is you can now compare emissions from Google Flights. So when you're booking your flights on Google, you can see the emissions trade-off from different flights. And I thought that was pretty cool because, you know, aviation is responsible for 12% of CO2 emissions from all transport sources compared to 74% from road transport. Everybody always thinks airplanes are worse, but we drive a lot. This is America, though. These numbers are from America, so.
Americans drive a lot.
Yeah.
So next time you're booking your flight, do check out Google. It can tell you.
Yeah. Plus, I mean, airplanes are about 3% of total global climate emissions, and that's small by percent-wise, but it's still something. You know what I mean? Check that out.
Yeah, they can all fly to COP26 on their private planes. We should definitely spend that $40 extra on cutting down our emissions. But yes, guys, let's do this. We're in this together.
Yeah, we're in this together. Private plane culture, super toxic, by the way. Anyway, let's get into this week. So this week, we're continuing our story time. And you guys, we're getting into oil. I know we touched on oil with the Niger Delta episode, but we are like getting into oil. And let me tell you, we're excited. Because one thing we live for is shitting on oil. Mm-hmm. Am I right?
Yeah.
Exactly. So today we're going to talk about a very popular oil spill. It's kind of sad. But as we do, I'm sorry, you guys, we are going to laugh, okay? I think that's partially why you come here. But we recognize that this was a tragedy. People died, and it's sad. Please don't come at me. I'm still going to laugh at incompetence when I see it. So
and in no way do we mean to be in any way disrespectful to the victims. What happened to them is very upsetting.
Mm-hmm. Right, 100%. We want you guys to understand that. That's why we're doing this series, to highlight these things. So, fun fact, or I guess not really that fun, about 17% of the U.S.'s total crude oil production comes from offshore projects in the Gulf today. That is 2021. And that means safe offshore drilling, which that's an oxymoron if I ever heard it, is still a concern today. Not to mention, the U.S. is currently the world's largest oil producer at 20%. And that is because of aggressive exploration in the last decade, fracking, more offshore stuff. And I mean, that's just how we keep those oil prices down. You guys complain about the gas prices at the gas pump, and Biden was like, okay, I'll authorize more drilling, you know. We'll get into that later. But that is kind of where this story comes from. It is an offshore oil disaster. And guys, of course, you may have guessed by now, we are talking about Deepwater Horizon. So Ajwa, tell us a story, girl.
Well, as we know, nothing good ever comes out of deep water drilling, except for oil, I guess, which I do not consider good. So my point stands. So oil and gas companies have been drilling in the Gulf of Mexico for fuel since like the 1930s. And today, the region actually provides more than a fifth of the US oil and gas production. So yeah, it's actually quite important for the US's economy.
Wow. So what does that look like percentage-wise for extraction and refining?
So according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, the Gulf of Mexico federal offshore oil production accounts for about 15% of total U.S. crude oil production, and federal offshore natural gas production in the Gulf accounts for 5% of total U.S. dry production. About over 47% of total U.S. petroleum refining capacity is located along the Gulf Coast, as well as 51% of total U.S. natural gas refining process plant capacity.
So it's a good chunk is what you're telling me.
Yeah, it's really important for the U.S., like I said.
Okay.
So why do they do deep water drilling? Well, basically, so the oil that is below the ocean that has been formed from organic materials such as the remains of plants and animals, they are trapped below ground like millions of years ago, right? And over time, pressure and heat, it transforms the molecules of these organic materials into hydrocarbons. And these are these compounds that are made of hydrogen and carbon, hence the name hydrocarbon.
Mm-hmm.
Now, these hydrocarbons form the building blocks of oil and natural gas. Now, this oil and gas, it accumulates underground into cracks and pockets between different layers of rocks, which just tends to hundreds of feet thick. And it's called these pay zones by the oil and gas industry. And energy companies have drilled more than 2,000 oil wells in the Gulf of Mexico.
I love that they call them pay zones because they are getting that money from that area.
They're not even like trying to be subtle about it. They're like, yep, a liquid gold, we coming for it.
Yep.
Okay, well, BP, which was formerly known as the British Petroleum, and if somebody's still wondering where BP comes from, it is that, blame the British. It is one of the world's largest oil companies, and they have their headquarters in London. The company leased this rig called Deepwater Horizon from one of the world's biggest oil rig contractor, which is called Transocean, and it began in 2001 to search for oil in an area of the Gulf that BP named the Macondo Prospect. BP hired Halliburton, which is an oil field services company, and this company basically helped operate the rig and carry out all the exploration.
Very interesting having these two oil giants there. Well, two industry giants there. BP was also the first company to explore in Nigeria. If you guys remember our Niger Delta episode 26, check it out. I know their production in 2020 was comparatively low, I'm guessing from COVID. So how many countries are they invested in right now?
So BP is still quite big. It operates in about 70 countries worldwide, and they produced 1.99 million barrels of oil per day in 2020. Also in 2020, Asia became the company's largest producing region and accounts for about 375,000 barrels of daily output.
Wow. I'm guessing Asia includes like the Central Asian region, the Middle East maybe. Yeah.
And probably China
Oh,
also.
yeah.
So they have this rig out there in the Gulf region. They have these crew members on this Deepwater Horizon rig, and they stood about 5,000 feet above the seabed, and they extended approximately 18,000 feet into the rock.
Wow.
Now, the crew had to rely on data that they were getting from underwater instruments to make these decisions. Now, they work with large, heavy steel materials and this flammable oil in a natural system that can be very unpredictable, right? So this is already like not a safe situation.
Sure.
Deepwater rigging it carries its risks.
It's very dangerous.
Yeah. On top of that, the operation was managed by a slew of contractors and subcontractors, which meant the opportunity for miscommunication was great, right? Like one company is delegating to another, then another is delegating to another. Like you saw, we had BP hiring Halliburton to run their operations on this rig that they got from Transocean. So it's like there's a lot of people involved in the whole process, right?
Yeah, of course.
But it's interesting to note that there was a concrete core that was recently installed by the said contractor Halliburton so that they could seal the well for like later use. And it later emerged through these documents that were released by WikiLeaks that a similar incident actually had occurred by a BP-owned ring in the Caspian Sea in September of 2008. And both cores were likely too weak to withstand the pressure because they were composed of a concrete mixture that used nitrogen gas to accelerate curing.
Oh my God. So we are already into mistake number one, or I guess incompetence fuck up number one.
Yeah. So like these wells, like when they dig it to get this oil out, they also need to like seal it so they can come back. They were better at sealing these documents. Haha. So they started to begin during drilling. And BP, they actually had to stop this drilling into the seabed at about 2,000 feet higher than what they expected because the pressure was too high. Right. So next, what they had to do was they had to line the hole with a casing, right? So like a casing, which is like a concrete pipe that prevents the hole from caving in.
Sure.
Now, usually a shorter casing, it would have been easier to cement into place and was deemed safer by computer models, but the company ultimately decided to use a longer casing, which they thought would be less prone to leaks.
Okay, so first off, we're back to pressure. Every time pressure, you guys. I'm going to say it right here. If you're an engineer who makes something that in any way deals with any type of gas, guys, pressure. We can't say it enough. But also, was this some sort of trade-off, like having leaks versus what the computer model deemed safe? Because I was a little lost there.
Okay. So in order to hold the casing in place, right, so concrete, it would be pumped into the space that is between the casing and the surrounding earth, right? So for this to work, the concrete must surround the casing evenly. Otherwise, it could be unstable and it could be vulnerable to oil leaking in from the sides as well.
Oh.
So to ensure an even snug fit, engineers fit the casing with centralizers, right, which are these metal tubes with strips of metal that is sticking out on each side.
So basically like the kind you would normally have when you're making any kind of concrete pillar.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
So they've used computer models to get data on all of this, right? And their computer models recommended that the casing, it should be fit with 21 centralizers. But BP engineers chose to insert only 6 centralizers because they had a supply shortage. Apparently the pandemic was a problem back then too. A joke on supply chain. But this obviously increased the risk that the cement would surround the casing unevenly.
Why do we do this, guys? We go out of our way as engineers to make these elaborate models, do all this math, do all this computering, and then we're like, you know what? That sounds like it's gonna take a lot of material, so we're just gonna not.
I don't know, they thought it was smart enough, right?
Yeah.
So now that they have this casing and the insufficient centralizers in place, it was time to pour the concrete. Now, BP engineers made several choices during this step, like that further increased the risk of error. First, they cut pre-cementing tests short, right? It prevented the technicians from actually checking for leaked oil at the bottom of the well. Then, they pumped the cement slower than recommended, which kind of further increased the risk that the cement would not fill the place around the casing evenly. And then, they limited the amount of cement used, which can cut the risk of lost oil, but it increases the risk of contamination by leaving even more of this casing exposed.
Anything for oil.
Anything for oil, really. and to cut your costs, basically.
Yeah.
But here's the inside scoop. So in the months leading up to the disaster, Halliburton had conducted several tests that showed that the type of cement that was being used was unstable, meaning that it might form pores that will allow liquids and gases to pass through it. Now, Halliburton did share some of the test results with BP, but the company didn't think it was important enough, and they just decided to just go on with it.
Wow. So let me just get this straight. You know what? I'm amazed by this because you have data, you did all this testing, so you know what's going to happen. You're basically trading lives for a little bit of money or just having a quicker turnaround on something. You are giving people court documents for if you ever get sued. That is what you are doing when you test and then ignore your test. It's stupid. But I like that these people are so stupid because I want them to get caught and I want there to be repercussions.
Okay, well, it's the oil industry. I don't know how much repercussions you're hoping for. Because,
That's so true.
They got money.
Fair enough.
So, now, the main event. Now, this crew that was made of Transocean and Halliburton employees, they finally finished the cementing just after midnight on April 20th. Now, at this point, BP and Halliburton representatives, they checked the valve to be sure that the pressure from the cement was not pushing too much liquid up out of it. And after a couple of hours, the BP and Halliburton representatives emailed members of the respective teams to confirm that the cementing job had been a success.
Okay.
So they did another version of their testing, whatever they were testing for this time. It was for leaks, and they thought they were good.
Okay.
But the operation went all right during the final step, when the crew planned to follow a set of precarious procedures to detach the Deepwater Horizon from the well to make room for a smaller rig. Now, this is all that the report describes.
Interesting.
Now, during this process, crew members conducted positive and negative pressure tests to ensure that no gas had leaked into the well, and the negative pressure test should have alerted them that there was a leak. But they misinterpreted the results.
Oh my God, really?
And these are not, now you have to understand, like, these are some of the best working on this thing.
I know. I tried to get an internship at BP. They were like, you bitch, please. This was a long time ago, guys. Don't judge me.
Yeah, I mean, now, girl, apply again. They will definitely keep you. But still, like, these are some really highly qualified people, but also overworking is a thing. And these are, when you do this on the regular, like, things can obviously go bad.
Sure.
But misinterpreting the results, kind of too much. But I don't know. They weren't trusting computer models, so I'm not surprised that they eventually made some error on the results.
Fair enough.
By 8 p.m., the local time, the crew concluded that everything was fine. But that was also a mistake because gaseous hydrocarbons had actually leaked into the well.
Oh boy.
So when gaseous hydrocarbons enter a well, they expand to fill up all the space around it, and they shoot up to the pipe in what is called a kick. And this is what happened at Deepwater Horizon. The crew closed the blowout preventer, now which is a seal that is designed to stop the expanding molecules from climbing up the well to the rig. But it was too late. The molecules climbed with increasing speed up the pipe until at around 9:40 p.m., the force of the rising gases in the pipes pushed the mud out into the rig's floor.
Oh boy.
And of course, a few minutes later, the gaseous hydrocarbon enveloped large areas of the rig and met at least one ignition source. It could have been heat sparks or like anything from onboard equipment, really. And that obviously erupted in an explosion that could be seen from miles away.
My goodness, that just sounds awful. So I know rigs, being what they are, especially offshore ones, have a lot of fail-safe structures built in to prevent these blowouts, which, like you said, is basically materials that come up from the wells, you guys. So what was the mechanism here?
So it rested on the seabed, and the blowout preventer, it was like a very elaborate fail-safe device that gave the drilling crew several days, basically, to seal the well. But once the oil and gas got past the blowout preventer, there was nothing to stop them from racing up the Horizon's riser pipe, which was a 5,000-foot umbilical cord to the rig.
Huh.
The drilling crew had trained for blowouts, right? Like floor hands were the crucial first responders. A driller would call blowout and time their response. This usually involves quickly installing a special valve on the drill pipe to end the imagined blowout. But confronted with the real thing for the first time, the person calling out realized there were no floor hands on the drilling floor to respond.
Oh my gosh. So they trained for this thing and then there was nobody to actually do the thing they trained for.
No, it's like having a fire drill and the fire guys never show up when there's actually fire.
Please, I can't take this anymore.
And 11 workers, they went missing during the explosion and were presumed dead 3 days later. The entire rig of Deepwater Horizon, it capsized 36 hours after the explosion on the morning of April 22, which is coincidentally Earth Day, a globally recognized day promoting environmental protection.
Oh my God, talk about irony.
Oh, you want to talk about irony? As the rig sank, it damaged the pipe leading down to the well. oil began spilling from the well and did not stop for 87 days.
Oof.
And without having any opposing force, oil began to discharge into the Gulf. And the volume of oil escaping the damaged well, it originally estimated by BP to be about 1,000 barrels per day, was thought by US government officials to have peaked at more than 60,000 barrels per day.
Just think about that, guys. I mean, we all, well, maybe not all, I guess some younger people listen to this podcast, but a good amount of us remember this happening, you know what I mean? It was a big deal.
Yeah, everyone was talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then over the next 3 months, the uncapped well leaked more than 300 Olympic-sized swimming pools of oil into the Gulf's water, making it the biggest oil spill in the United States history. It pumped out 12 times more oil than the Exxon Valdez spill of 1989, which we'll talk about in one of our extra policy episodes. You guys will find out.
Yeah. You know what, Aja? Thank you for giving me that descriptor, that visual of 300 Olympic-sized swimming pools. I love when you give me these visuals. It's horrible, but it makes you understand.
Now we know how much it was.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of oil rigging happening around the world without incident. Is there a particular reason why it happened here so bad, and why did it go on for so long?
Okay, so the 2010 Gulf spill, it actually presented like a unique combination of location factors that likely played a part in the oil spate. First, the origin of the release occurred at a water depth of approximately 5,000 feet.
Mm-hmm.
According to the 2003 National Research Council report, this type of scenario introduces a number of complications compared to oil that is released at the surface, that is, let's say, from a tanker spill. And although some research has found that the majority of oil from a deepwater release will reach the surface in several hours, the resulting surface slick may be thinner, which is, of course, compared to a typical surface spill, because some of the oil will be naturally diffused and dispersed as it rises to the surface. Secondly, the Oil Well Blowout was a multi-day event, discharging the oil into the Gulf waters at a rapid rate, right? Like, some have surmised that this high-speed discharge increased the rate at which the oil naturally dispersed, right?
Yeah.
Some initial scientific studies have suggested that microbial organisms, which essentially eat certain oil components, may play a part in controlling the oil's ultimate fate.
Speaking of controlling the oil's ultimate fate, let's get into what is our ray of hope when we talk about these situations. What do they do afterwards to rectify this awful situation?
Okay, so as soon as the news of the spill was received, the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, also known as NOAA, and other agencies, they began working to assess how the oil and other contaminants were impacting natural resources.
I really love NOAA. I just want to put that out there. In case NOAA ever listens to this podcast, anybody from there, hire me. I love you guys so much. I use a lot of your data. I love NOAA.
Yes, please hire her. Maybe that would make her shut up. But in the weeks following the explosion and spill, environmental first responders and scientists, they tried several ways that they could introduce to reduce the harm to the environment. They sprayed dispersions, liquids that help microbes break down oil. They set surface oil on fire to burn it up quickly and surrounded oil with floating booms to prevent its spread. And they also dispatched underwater chambers to contain leaking oil. Meanwhile, BP made 3 attempts to cap the well by drilling a relief well alongside the failed well. An additional 30 vessels and 1,000 responders were deployed to the Gulf Coast. Then they also had a second relief well that started. But the 3 containment domes that they designed to collect most of the oil, they were removed due to hydrate buildup, which made them obviously ineffective. On May 15th and 16th, BP inserted a pipe in riser to siphon all some of the spilling oil to be collected on a vessel on the surface. So, oil was spilling, so they're like, it's going to swim the water. Might as well, siphon some off.
Take it.
But anyway, between May 26th to May 28th, BP pumped thousands of barrels of mud into the well in an attempt to plug the leak. And this is this procedure that is known in the industry as a top kill. The procedure was unsuccessful, of course.
Sure.
The amount of oil escaping from the well had been underestimated, and accurate information about the amount was not actually available.
No, I'm not surprised, because throughout this, we've seen that these people are unable to get accurate information about their own stuff. So, yeah, why would that change now?
Then in July, from 10th to 15th, BP installed a new capping stick, which is like this containment cap, and it has a tighter seal than the previous containment cap that they put on.
Yeah.
And on July 15th, they finally closed the valves on the cap, and it stopped the oil that was leaking out of the riser.
Whew. Well, that was a whole situation that was very chaotic, and the restoration process sounds insane. So how did it eventually work out? Did they successfully clean it, and what ended up being the final cost?
So as oil began to contaminate Louisiana beaches in May, it was manually removed. More difficult to clean were actually the state's marshes and estuaries, where the topography was knit together by delicate plant life. By June, oil and tar balls had made landfall on the beaches of Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida, all along the Gulf Coast. In all, an estimated 1,100 miles of shoreline was polluted.
My goodness.
In 2018, BP estimated that the spill had cost the company nearly $65 billion in legal fees, settlements, and funds for cleanup and restoration.
Wow.
I mean, rightfully so. Please.
Yeah.
Like, although much of the oil was recovered or dispersed in the ocean, the surrounding ecosystems, they still have not fully recovered. So 65 billion, I think, still not enough, TBH.
Yeah. They should have spent a little more money because it sounds like we still have issues. Speaking of environmental ecosystems and all of that, what did all this lead to? What were the implications?
Okay, so obviously communities were affected, the environment was affected, but to really dig down, these hydrocarbons, they were evaporating from oil at the sea surface, right? And they may have formed organic aerosols, ozone, and nitrogen oxidation products, which obviously can impact lung and heart functions of humans and animals.
Those are not good things.
Yeah.
And what are we seeing in terms of obviously the water was affected. Yeah.
But so we know that the chemical composition of oil, it plays a critical role in how it reacts in an environment.
Sure.
And this Gulf spill, it involved crude oil, which is not a homogeneous material, but it contains a mixture of chemical compounds that interact differently when exposed to the environment. According to a 2003 Natural Research Council report, evaporation can remove about 1/3 of the volume of a medium crude oil slick within the first day of a release. However, there's other components of the crude oil, right? And they can persist for much longer. For instance, the fraction of crude oil that is water soluble can persist for weeks to years. Then there's other portions of spilled crude oil that can form into tar balls, which are persistent and may be transported to great distances from the release site. So basically, when oil enters a marine environment, it encounters an array of natural processes that transport the oil from where it started, and it can also alter its physical and chemical makeup. And these altered materials will be incorporated into the plant's various natural systems that can be water, soil, air, even living organisms. And the time involved in these changes, it can range from a matter of minutes and hours for some crude oil components to years and possibly even decades for other components.
Yeah, it's a really severe thing, guys. I don't know how many of you listening to this, I assume that you guys are interested in the environment or work in that space at least. That's why we talk about fossil fuels so much. The damage can be sometimes irreparable. So speaking of irreparable damage, right, let's talk about climate consequences in terms of the air. What could we possibly see from an explosion like this with all this crude oil burning?
Right. So when there's an explosion, there's obviously massive plumes of smoke from burning oil. They basically consisted of aerosolized black carbon soot. And now these organic particles, they're measured at high concentrations within the smoke plumes. And these organic particles in these plumes, they were lofted high into the atmosphere by the intense heat that was generated by the burning oil, and it obviously increased the atmospheric pollution. Like I said, we can get these nitrous oxides that can be made. There can be aerosols. Ozone gets affected. It's sulfur dioxide.
Yeah, especially when you think of the fact that this isn't even refined crude, which is dangerous. This is just pure crude. The amount of things in there, I can't even imagine. The sulfur content, we don't know because they won't tell us. But yeah, it can be dangerous.
talking about bad, it's even bad for the pockets. It ain't good. The effects of the spill, they rippled through the economy, especially on the Gulf Coast. The U.S. Department of the Interior, they temporarily halted offshore deepwater drilling for about 5 months after the spill. And it definitely caused some wage and job losses, especially in Florida. However, what's interesting is that jobs and wages increased in oil-intensive portions of Louisiana, which was the state that was closest to the spill.
I'm thinking because they weren't doing offshore as much and they had to move these people to more land drilling. So they were like, go there, go there.
Yeah, they were probably just like relocating these people.
Yeah.
There were obviously concerns over seafood safety, which caused fisheries to close in the months after the spill. And at one point, 36% of federal waters in the Gulf were closed.
One thing about fish is they hold a lot of the stuff in their fatty tissue. So seafood is actually a great way. I guess the word great is wrong, but it's actually a way that pollutants in water can reach human beings. They go up the food chain that way. I still love fish. And just imagine all the Gulf Coast shrimp that died and didn't make it to me first. So sad.
Yeah, it actually hurt the commercial and recreational fishing industry so much that they lost 25,000 jobs and $2.3 billion in industry output.
Oh, that's sad.
But Ala didn't get her shrimp.
Which is also very sad, guys.
Very sad indeed. Well, talking about species, of course, wildlife capture, transportation, rehabilitation, and relocation, they all needed to be done around the spill. These efforts focus primarily on marine mammals, sea turtles, and birds during their response to this.
And let me tell you guys, sea turtles, they take that very seriously in these Gulf states. Like the work I do on the beaches, every time we do restoration, even though the restoration is to help protect the beaches, we have to be very careful about how we do it because of the sea turtles and their nests. And they should take it seriously. It's a really big deal in the Gulf states.
No, they really do care for their sea turtles because they fill the news, but there were images of these poor little birds and these turtles, right? Like they were oiled. And these animals die because they can't fly or swim well, and it can exhaust them and make them vulnerable to predators. And NOAA researchers found that at least 14,000 sea turtles and hatchlings died because of this spill.
That is so sad, you guys. I really love sea turtles. This is really bumming me out.
Yeah, every species of the crustacean in the Gulf, it was exposed to the oil. And many dolphins and whales also suffered injuries.
Oh, I'm very sad that 11 people died, like RIP to them, sorry to their families. But when we talk about the animals in these episodes, it always really gets to me.
It's not just these animals that are dying, it's their habitats that are dying.
Right.
Oil can enter animals through their skins or orifices, right? And this can be harmful and even deadly because hydrocarbons, in particular a type called polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, they're very toxic to animals.
Yeah, they're toxic to everybody, but
you all are toxic anyway. Like animals need something. But of course, when you do all of that, like Ala said, it's like collecting court documents. So they did.
Yeah.
Court collected documents. It launched a tangled web of legal lawsuits against BP, Transocean, Halliburton, anybody that BP partnered with on the well. In 2011, even before all the damage had been assessed, NOAA reached an agreement with BP that the company would pay $1 billion for every restoration projects, like cleaning up beaches, marshes, and wetlands.
Oh, I love wetlands.
So NOAA said you can pay $1 billion for all these restoration projects. Eventually, the majority of lawsuits against BP were settled in 2016 for $20.8 billion, which is the largest environmental damage settlement in U.S. history.
They earned it, though. They earned it with all this shit.
Mm-hmm. NOAA did a lot, so they kind of deserved it.
You guys, Team NOAA, okay?
Please hire her, NOAA. No, but this settlement, it covered a civil penalty, it covered natural resource damages and economic claims, and among other charges. But most of the money was allocated to projects for economic and ecological restoration. They had $500 million that were given to the National Academy of Sciences to create the Gulf Research Program, which was a 30-year program meant to support the Gulf environment and community and explore the safety of the offshore energy industry.
Okay, we'll get into that safety and offshore drilling in the same sentence, whatever. But what I really want to know is who went to jail? Who lost their job? I don't want to just hear about money.
Okay, so a former BP PLC rig supervisor who pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor charge in the 2010 Gulf of Mexico oil spill was sentenced to 10 months of probation. A Justice Department probe into the spill led to criminal charges against just 4, mostly lower-level BP employees, because that's what happens. Somehow, all these big people in their corner offices just get away with it.
I hate it.
Former BP Vice President David Rainey was acquitted by a jury on charges that he lied to federal agents about how much oil was spilled. Then the fourth defendant, engineer Kurt Mix, was sentenced to 6 months of probation after pleading guilty to damaging a computer. Again, a misdemeanor. So he got more months of probation to damaging a computer and less for damaging the earth.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Yeah. It's crazy. Like they always find some low level or some supervisor to take the heat.
Okay, well, some good things did come out of it, like policy changes happened.
Good.
And there are a lot of reasons to say things have probably improved since the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. Like, for one thing, negative pressure tests are now required and must be reported to the U.S. Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement.
Yeah.
Now, this forces operators to think more carefully about the test results, and it gives the regulators a chance to ask questions and seek explanations if they aren't satisfied. However, the systematic problems that led to the disaster, they still persist today. Because the rigs are operated by a contractor, and then they're staffed by people from different companies who are doing all these specialist jobs. And they're basically maybe nobody on the rig that really understands in great detail what each specialty is doing. So there's not a lot of operations management that is happening on these rigs.
Which is still a problem.
Mm-hmm. And companies like BP that really lease these drilling sites from the federal government, they deploy onboard representatives who talk to contractors and onshore specialists to make sure work is being carried out safely. But how effectively these representatives interact with contractors and specialists is really determined by the company, and you can't really regulate that easily.
Yeah.
It can still happen today. It's just, let's hope not. Basically, that's what we gather from it.
Yeah. Hell of a story, guys. I mean, a popular story, but I learned a lot from this episode. I hope you guys did too. So I have one last question for you, Ajwa. Thank you for telling us the story. I know that BP has actually expanded its projects in the Gulf of Mexico as of this year. In fact, the new project is expected to increase output at one of the largest fields in the Gulf of Mexico to date, with a peak annual average gross production. I think they're saying 25,000 barrels of oils equivalent a day from the initial 2 well tiebacks. Eventually, a total of 8 wells are expected to be drilled as part of this project's overall development. So, do you think this additional expansion is worth it? Do you think that BP has learned their lesson? Are they being too aggressive with this expansion? Thoughts?
You know how I feel about oil drilling and expansion, especially in 2021. We are living in a world where we can definitely come up with better energy solutions, and we should be focusing on that instead of expanding our already exhausted natural resources and really harming the planet in the process. So no, of course, I think this is all bad. I don't think they should be expanded. I do think there's obviously still a chance, like we've seen, there's still the same chances that it can happen again, and it's just not worth it, not when there's so much alternate energy sources that can be explored and that can really use some of this investment that we still continue to put into oil and these natural resources. So no, personally, I believe and their water is being contaminated and their land is being affected, and it's not good for the environment, it's not good for the community anymore. It is harming way more than it is giving. It is not the 1700s, this is not the industrial revolution, this is not the beginning. this is the end. And I think it's about time we stop.
I think it's interesting how you said this is not the beginning, this is the end, because for a lot of Americans or a lot of people around the world, right, like most of our cars still run on oil. It is true that a lot of other things that we need energy sources for, we could just at least consider transitioning to natural gas, nuclear energy, and, you know, that'll get us to more renewables as we go on. I'm a big fan of transitioning, at the very least, because I think it's a way people can meet in the middle. Question for you guys. We know that gas prices were at an all-time high a few months ago because I live in Texas and I was like at the pump one day and the pump said 301 for a gallon of gas and I gasped. I audibly gasped. I was like, what? So people were starting to complain. I guess, you know, as soon as Biden opened up more areas for drilling, he signed that legislation, gas prices dropped. I just bought gas today for $2.75. So considering that him opening up those wells is the reason that oil prices are dropping again, I mean, I don't know if you can say causation, but definitely strong correlation. What do you guys think? Do you think it is worth the trade, considering the socioeconomic makeup of the people in this country? And maybe other countries too, where people rely on transportation and public transport isn't great, so personal transportation is key. Do you think the trade-off for having gas in our cars is worth continued exploration? Let us know. We won't judge you. We truly want to know what you guys think. Organization time. 350.org is an international movement of ordinary people working to end the age of fossil fuels and build a world of community-led renewable energy. You should apply here, Ajwa. You'd probably like it. 350.org was founded in 2008 by a group of university students in the United States. They were friends, like Ajwa and I are friends, with author Bill McKibben, who wrote one of the first books on global warming for the general public. And I like this group because they started doing one thing and they just kept expanding. They do a lot of advocacy. It's really cool, you guys. So that's our show. Next week, we are doing what will be our last episode of 2021.
Yay.
But just, you know, stay posted because we might throw you guys another extra credit in between somewhere there. Check out our website, planetpolicypals.com, for updates and show notes, as well as references on everything we talked about today. Email us, leave us a voicemail, rate and review us. Chemical disasters are clearly something we care about. Oil spills are something that we are super into just from our background. So let us know anything you know in that department. You never know. We might cover one of your messages as an episode. I mean, we did it for blue carbon. And I gotta say, guys, we didn't think so many of you would be into blue carbon, but you guys really came out to listen to that one. So thank you. It was nice to have you guys request something and then actually listen to it. It was a hard one to do as well. So thanks.
Thanks, guys.
So follow us on Twitter at Planet Policy Pal, Instagram at Planet Policy Pals, and like our Facebook page because we've been gone so long. You guys, our follower count dropped. Help us get those numbers up, guys.
Yeah, please do. She's been pestering me about it all week. So please, I'm this close to buying Instagram followers.
Save Ajwa some money and stop her from buying followers. Okay, guys, follow us. Check out our YouTube page if you need captions as you listen. And of course, stay safe and warm during this cold time if you live somewhere horrible like New York. And until next time, keep learning, pals.